Okay, let's dive right into something that sounds a little weird, but stick with me here. The smelly shoe rack problem.
Now, you're probably thinking this is a joke, right? But get this, that's the actual conclusion from a study that won an Ig Nobel Prize. This isn't just some random complaint, it's a scientific finding. And it opens up a really fascinating question.
So what are we really talking about here? Just stinky shoes? Or is there something much, much bigger hiding in this seemingly silly observation about how we design almost everything around us? That's what we're going to find out.
Yep, you heard that right. A serious, prize-winning study was actually conducted on what it's like to use a shoe rack when it smells bad. Let's dig into why this is so much more important than it sounds.
The research kicks off by pointing to this huge fundamental bias in modern product design. Basically, there's an entire sense that engineers and designers just consistently ignore.
I mean, really think about it. When you buy a product, what do they talk about? How it looks, right? How it feels, how easy it is to use. But what about how it smells? Or, and this is the key, the smells it's going to run into out in the real world. Yeah, that's usually just shrugged off as an environmental factor. Or even worse, it's considered your problem.
And this is where you can really see the gap. In the design world, sight and touch are king. They get all the focus. But in our actual lives, smell is just, it's everywhere. You can't avoid it. And that imbalance, that's where all the trouble starts. So, to prove their point, the researchers couldn't just ask people what they thought. No, they needed to be super scientific about it. They had to set up this really clever experiment to isolate the one thing they cared about, the smell itself. The setup was actually pretty simple, but brilliant. First, they got a bunch of identical shoe racks. Then, they brought in shoes with different controlled levels of odor, from absolutely none all the way up to, whoa, that's strong. And then they just asked people to rate their experience with the shoe rack. Critically, everything looked exactly the same. So this is the most important part. Nothing about the product itself changed. Not the color, not the materials, nothing. The only thing that was different between the groups was the presence and intensity of a bad smell.
All right, now we get to the results. And this is where things get really interesting and kind of counterintuitive. What happens when the only thing wrong is the smell?
Well, the results were just wow. As the smell got worse, the user ratings for the shoe rack didn't just dip a little, they absolutely plummeted. It wasn't a nice gentle slope, it was a cliff. A strong odor didn't just make the experience a bit unpleasant, it totally tanked it. And here it is. This is the knockout punch. The people in the study knew the smell was coming from the shoes. Logically, you'd think they'd say, man, these shoes stink. But they didn't. Overwhelmingly, their conclusion was that the shoe rack itself was a piece of junk. Let's just break that down because it's so important. The sensory input was smelly shoes, but the cognitive conclusion was bad product. They took an external problem, the odor, and they internalized it as a fundamental flaw in the product's design.
So, why? Why on earth does our brain do that? It seems completely illogical, right? Well, the answer is deep in our wiring. It's all about how our nose is plugged directly into the most ancient, powerful parts of our brain.
It's called the olfactory limbic connection, and here's what that means in simple terms. Unlike your other senses, your sense of smell takes a shortcut. It bypasses the logical part of your brain and goes straight to the limbic system. That's your brain's headquarters for emotion, memory, and gut feelings. It's a direct hotline to your emotions.
And what this all boils down to is this. Feeling literally comes before thinking. When you smell something, you feel disgust or pleasure instantly, way before your logical brain has a chance to catch up. And that powerful feeling just colors every rational judgment that follows. The negative gut reaction to the smell overrode the logic that said, hey, it's just the shoes.
Okay, so let's zoom out. This is where a funny little study about shoe racks becomes this huge lesson for pretty much anyone who makes anything for other human beings. There's a quote from the study that just nails it. Technology is not used in a clean world. Think about that. Engineers and designers often work in these perfect, clean labs, and they assume their products are going to live in that same pristine environment. But reality? Reality is messy. And this is so much bigger than shoe racks. Think about your kitchen trash can that starts to smell, a gym locker, the inside of your car on a hot day, or even wearable tech that you're sweating all over. In every single one of these cases, if the designer ignores the reality of smell, their product is going to be perceived as cheap or poorly designed. And that really is the ultimate lesson here. Good design,
Truly human-centered design can't just be for a perfect, sterile world. It has to anticipate and accommodate the messy, imperfect, and sometimes smelly reality of our actual lives.
So it leads us with this final thought. If we've been ignoring something as fundamental and powerful as smell for so long, what other obvious parts of being human are we completely failing to design for?